The fortune teller's hands trembled as she held the switched envelope, the one I'd carefully prepared with my own hands just hours before. My stepmother, Miranda, sat across from her with that smug, expectant smile plastered on her surgically enhanced face, completely unaware that the prophecy she was about to receive would be her undoing. I watched from my hiding spot behind the velvet curtain in the back room, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. In my previous life, this fortune reading had spelled my doom. In this life, it would be hers. "Your fate is written in the stars," the fortune teller intoned, her voice dramatic as she opened the envelope. My envelope. "Great fortune awaits you in the East. A business opportunity that glitters like gold will present itself within the fortnight. Invest everything, mortgage your properties, sell your jewels, the returns will be 100-fold." Miranda's eyes lit up with greed, that familiar hunger I'd seen countless times before. In my past life, that prophecy had been meant for me, a cruel trap she'd orchestrated to steal my inheritance. I'd followed it blindly, invested my mother's money in a fraudulent scheme, and lost everything. By the time I discovered the truth, I was penniless, and Miranda had already convinced my father to write me out of his will entirely. 3 months later, I died in a car accident that I now knew was no accident at all. But death had given me an unexpected gift. I'd woken up 6 months in the past, 21 years old again, with all my memories intact. This time, things would be different. I slipped out of the fortune teller's shop through the back door. I'd paid her handsomely to play along with my scheme, and took a taxi back to our family estate. Well, it wasn't really our estate anymore. In the 3 years since my mother's death from cancer, Miranda had systematically taken over every aspect of our household. She'd moved in within 6 months of meeting my father at one of his pharmaceutical company's charity galas, and within a year, they were married. She came with a daughter, Clarissa, who was my age and seemed to take particular pleasure in making my life miserable. The mansion loomed before me, all white columns and perfectly manicured lawns. My mother had loved this house, filled it with warmth and laughter. Now it felt like a museum, cold, sterile, and hostile. I walked through the front door and immediately heard Clarissa's shrill voice coming from the living room. "Daddy, you can't be serious. You're actually letting her go to the company gala next week? She'll embarrass us all." I paused in the hallway, my hand tightening on my purse. In my previous life, I hadn't gone to that gala. Clarissa had spilled red wine all over my dress just hours before, and I'd been too upset to attend. That night, my father had announced Clarissa as his successor at the company, effectively cutting me out of my birthright. My mother had founded Chen Pharmaceuticals with my father. I was supposed to inherit her shares. But Miranda and Clarissa had been working steadily to poison my father against me, and I'd been too naive, too trusting to see it. "She's my daughter too, Clarissa," my father said. But his voice was weary, lacking conviction. "Is she, though?" Miranda's honeyed voice joined the conversation, and I could picture her draping herself over my father's arm. "Darling, we need to talk seriously about Scarlett. I found these in her room today." I crept closer to the doorway, peeking around the corner. Miranda was holding up a collection of pill bottles, sleeping pills, anxiety medication. My heart sank. Those were planted, of course. In my previous life, they'd used a similar tactic to have me committed to a psychiatric facility for 3 months, just long enough for them to forge my signature on documents, signing away my mother's shares. "She's been hoarding these," Miranda continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "I'm worried about her, James. Ever since Helen died, Scarlett has been unstable. I think she needs professional help, residential treatment, perhaps." "Those aren't mine." I stepped into the room, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. 3 faces turned toward me, my father's weary and conflicted, Clarissa's gleeful with malice, and Miranda's perfectly composed mask slipping just slightly to reveal the calculation underneath. "Scarlett," my father began, but I cut him off. "Those aren't mine," I repeated, walking further into the room. "I've never taken sleeping pills in my life, but I'm sure if we check the prescription, we'll find they're actually from Miranda's personal pharmacy account. She has quite the collection, doesn't she? Ambien, Xanax, Valium. I've seen the bottles in her bathroom." Miranda's face flushed. How dare you go through my personal— I haven't gone through anything. I lied smoothly. But the maids talk, Miranda. They've been concerned about your habits. It was a bluff, but it landed. My father's expression shifted and I pressed my advantage. But I'm sure there's a perfectly innocent explanation, I continued, keeping my voice light and reasonable. Just like I'm sure there's an explanation for why you've been meeting with that fortune teller in Chinatown every month for the past year. What kinds of prophecies has she been giving you, I wonder? The color drained from Miranda's face, and I knew I'd hit my mark. I'd followed her several times in my previous life, documenting her visits to various psychics and fortune tellers. She was obsessed with them, made major life decisions based on their predictions. It was her greatest weakness, and I intended to exploit it fully. The gala is next week, I said, turning to my father. I'll be there. I'm Helen Chen's daughter, and I have every right to be present when matters concerning her company are discussed. I left the room before anyone else could respond, climbing the stairs to my bedroom. My hands were shaking as I closed the door behind me. That had been risky, showing my cards so early, but I needed to establish myself as someone who couldn't be pushed around anymore. In my previous life, I'd been too soft, too eager to please, too desperate for my father's approval. I'd let them walk all over me until there was nothing left. Never again. I pulled out my laptop and opened an encrypted file I'd been building since my rebirth. Inside were detailed notes on everything I remembered from my past life. Dates, events, business deals, stock prices, and most importantly, the elaborate con that Miranda was about to fall for. In my previous life, the Eastern opportunity from the fortune teller's prophecy had been a real estate development scheme in Shanghai. A smooth-talking businessman named David Wu had promised incredible returns on a luxury condominium project. The development was real, the permits were real, but the investment opportunity was a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. David Wu had taken millions from dozens of investors before disappearing to Thailand, leaving them all with worthless paper and empty promises. Miranda, following the fortune teller's prophecy, had convinced my father to invest heavily. When it collapsed, she'd blamed me, claiming I'd recommended David Wu to them. My father, already suspicious of me thanks to their psychological warfare, had believed her. By then, I'd already lost my own inheritance to a similar scam, also orchestrated by them, and had no credibility left. But this time, I wouldn't be the victim. This time, I'd make sure Miranda followed that prophecy to her own destruction. Over the next week, I worked carefully to set everything in motion. I'd created a fake prophecy that would lead Miranda to invest not just heavily, but catastrophically. The Eastern opportunity I'd written into her, switched fortune reading, was deliberately vague, allowing her to interpret it however her greed dictated, and I knew exactly what she would choose. Through my mother's old contacts, people who still remembered Helen Chen with loyalty and affection, I learned that David Wu was already in the early stages of setting up his scam. He was making preliminary contacts, building credibility, laying the groundwork. In my previous life, he hadn't launched the full con until 6 months from now, but with the right encouragement, I could accelerate his timeline. I created a fake investor profile, a wealthy widow interested in the Shanghai development, and reached out to David Wu through his network. I met him at a 5-star hotel restaurant, dressed in my mother's vintage Chanel and her pearls, looking every inch the wealthy mark he was searching for. Mrs. Fitzgerald, he greeted me, using the fake name I'd given. He was handsome in a generic way, mid-40s, expensive suit, practiced smile. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Mr. Wu, I replied, shaking his hand. I've heard such exciting things about your development project, but I must confess I'm not looking to invest myself. His smile faltered slightly. Oh? I'm more interested in referring other investors. For a finder's fee, of course. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. I know several very wealthy individuals who are looking for exactly the kind of opportunity you're offering. People with significant capital who are perhaps less sophisticated in their due diligence than they should be. Interest sparked in his eyes, the predatory gleam of a con artist spotting an even bigger opportunity. I see. And what kind of finder's fee would you expect? 10% of whatever they invest, I said smoothly. And I can guarantee you at least $5 million in investments within the next 2 weeks. Possibly more. We negotiated for another hour, and by the end of our lunch, I had him convinced that I was a corrupt wealth manager looking to make money off my own client's misfortune. He had no idea that my real target was my stepmother, and that the $5 million I was promising was going to come from her own desperate greed. The night of the gala arrived. I spent hours getting ready, wearing a stunning crimson gown that had been my mother's. Elegant, sophisticated, and impossible to ignore. When I descended the stairs, I saw my father's eyes widen with recognition and pain. For a moment, I looked exactly like my mother had 20 years ago. "Scarlett," he whispered. "You look beautiful," Miranda finished coldly, appearing from the dining room with Clarissa in tow. They were both dressed impeccably as well, but there was something in Miranda's eyes, a manic energy I recognized from my previous life. She'd received the prophecy 3 days ago, and I knew she'd been obsessing over it ever since, trying to figure out what the Eastern opportunity meant. The gala was held at the Grand Lexington Hotel, a glittering affair with hundreds of guests from the pharmaceutical and medical industries. My father's company, Chen Pharmaceuticals, was celebrating its 30th anniversary, though my mother's name and contributions had been increasingly erased from the official narrative since Miranda's arrival. I worked the room strategically, reconnecting with old family friends who remembered my mother, making sure I was visible and present. Several board members expressed surprise and pleasure at seeing me. They'd been told I was unwell and unable to attend company functions. I smiled graciously and corrected that misconception, planting seeds of doubt about Miranda's version of events. Around 9 o'clock, I spotted David Wu entering the ballroom. I'd invited him, of course, telling him that several of my marks would be present. I caught his eye and gave a subtle nod, then watched as he began circulating through the crowd. Now came the delicate part. I needed to engineer a meeting between David and Miranda without making it obvious that I'd orchestrated it. I waited, watching Miranda like a hawk. She was drinking more than usual, expensive champagne that loosened her tongue and lowered her inhibitions. She kept checking her phone, probably consulting astrology apps or fortune-telling websites. She was primed for suggestion, desperately seeking signs about what the prophecy meant. "Scarlett, dear," a familiar voice said beside me. I turned to find Mrs. Elizabeth Thornton, one of my mother's oldest friends and a major shareholder in the company. "I'm so glad to see you here. Your mother would be so proud." "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton," I replied warmly. We chatted for several minutes, and I carefully steered the conversation toward business opportunities and investments. Loud enough that Miranda, circling nearby like a shark, could overhear. "There's so much happening in Asian markets right now," Mrs. Thornton was saying. "Shanghai especially. The development boom is extraordinary. Of course, one must be careful. There are many opportunities, but also many scams." "Shanghai?" Miranda's voice cut into our conversation. She'd moved closer, her champagne glass dangling from her fingers. "Did you say Shanghai?" Mrs. Thornton raised an eyebrow at the interruption, but answered politely. "Yes, the real estate market there is quite active. Are you interested in Asian investments, Miranda?" "I might be," Miranda said, her eyes gleaming. "Do you know of any specific opportunities?" I held my breath. This was the moment. Mrs. Thornton began describing some legitimate developments she'd heard about, but I could see Miranda's attention wandering, searching the room as if looking for a sign. And then she saw David Wu. I'd briefed David on what Miranda looked like, and I'd told him to make himself conspicuous. He was standing near the bar, talking animatedly with another guest about incredible opportunities in Shanghai real estate. His voice carried just enough for Miranda to hear the key words: Shanghai, development, luxury condominiums, guaranteed returns. Miranda's head snapped toward him like a puppet on strings. The prophecy had said East, and now here was a well-dressed businessman at her husband's company gala talking about Eastern opportunities. To her superstitious mind, this was fate. I excused myself from Mrs. Thornton and drifted toward the bar, positioning myself where I could watch the inevitable introduction. Clarissa appeared at my elbow, her face already flushed with champagne. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "This is supposed to be my night. Daddy's going to announce me as the new vice president." "Is he?" I asked mildly. "That's interesting. I wasn't aware that decision had been made official." "It has been," Clarissa snapped. Mother made sure of it. I turned to look at her fully. Clarissa had always been cruel to me, but in my previous life, I'd never understood why. We'd been raised together for 3 years, and she'd seemed to take personal offense at my very existence. Now, with the clarity of my rebirth, I could see it clearly. She was deeply insecure, threatened by my connection to the company through my mother, desperate to prove herself worthy of her mother's schemes. Clarissa, I said quietly, do you ever wonder if your mother actually loves you, or if you're just another tool in her collection? Her face went white, then red. How dare you? I dare because I've seen how she uses people, I continued. You think you're special, that you're her partner in all this, but you're not. You're just the most convenient weapon she has against me. When she doesn't need you anymore, she'll discard you just as easily. You're crazy, Clarissa spat, but there was uncertainty in her eyes now. Maybe, I agreed, on these, or maybe I'm the only one who sees clearly. I left her standing there and moved closer to where Miranda had successfully inserted herself into David Wu's conversation. I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but I could read body language perfectly. Miranda was leaning in, asking questions, and David was smoothly delivering his pitch. He was good at this, charismatic, confident, just the right balance of successful businessman and generous opportunity sharer. By the end of the evening, I saw them exchange business cards. Miranda's face was alight with excitement and greed. The prophecy was coming true before her eyes, or so she believed. She had found her golden opportunity in the East. Over the next week, I monitored Miranda's activities carefully. She met with David Wu 3 more times, each meeting lasting longer than the last. She was falling for the con completely, just as I had in my previous life. Through David, who thought I was his partner in crime, I learned exactly how much she was planning to invest. $5 million initially, with promises of more. She was mortgaging the Manhattan penthouse she'd convinced my father to buy her last year. She was selling her jewelry collection, gifts from my father worth hundreds of thousands. She was even trying to persuade my father to invest company funds, though he was being more cautious than she liked. But $5 million wasn't enough, not for the destruction I had in mind. I needed her to go all in, to risk everything, to be so financially devastated that she could never recover. So, I made my next move. I created another fake identity, this time as a successful female investor who'd already put money into David's project. I wrote glowing reviews on investment forums that Miranda frequented. I had this fake investor coincidentally meet Miranda at a spa, where she raved about the incredible returns she was already seeing from the Shanghai development. The hook went deeper. Miranda was now convinced that this was not just a good opportunity, but the opportunity of a lifetime. The prophecy had promised returns of 100-fold. In her mind, this was destiny. 2 weeks after the gala, Miranda made her move. I was in the library, supposedly studying for my graduate school entrance exams, another thing she'd tried to sabotage in my previous life, when I heard her and Clarissa arguing in the hallway outside. Mother, this is insane, Clarissa was saying. You can't mortgage everything we have. You don't understand, Miranda snapped. This is our chance. When this investment pays off, we'll have more money than James could earn in a lifetime. We won't need him anymore. We won't need his daughter's company or her mother's shares. We'll be independently wealthy. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. So that had been her plan all along, not just to steal my inheritance, but to make enough money to leave my father entirely. In my previous life, had she succeeded? Had she planned to take her profits and run, leaving my father bankrupt and heartbroken? But what if it doesn't work? Clarissa pressed. What if it's a scam? It's not a scam, Miranda said firmly. I've done my research, and besides, the prophecy was clear. Great fortune awaits in the East. This is it, Clarissa. This is what I've been waiting for. Your fortune teller also told you that you'd marry a prince, Clarissa muttered. Don't be ridiculous. She never said that. And keep your voice down. If James hears about this before I've secured everything, he might try to stop me. Their footsteps faded down the hallway, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was working. Everything was working exactly as I'd planned. But I couldn't rest yet. The final pieces still needed to fall into place. I picked up my phone and called the one person I'd been saving for the right moment, my maternal grandfather, Richard Chen. He'd founded Chen Pharmaceuticals with my mother before they'd had a falling out when she'd married my father. He'd disapproved of the marriage, thought my father was too weak, too easily manipulated. He'd been right, as it turned out, but pride and stubbornness had kept him away for years. In my previous life, I'd never known my grandfather. He'd died a year after my mother, and we'd never reconciled. But I'd learned through his will that he'd left everything to me, a fortune worth tens of millions, sitting in a trust I'd been too broken and manipulated to access before I died. In this life, I'd reached out to him 1 week after my rebirth. The conversation had been awkward at first. Decades of estrangement don't disappear easily. But I'd told him about Miranda, about the systematic abuse, about the plots against my mother's company. He'd been skeptical at first, but I'd provided proof. Documents, recordings, evidence I'd gathered carefully. His anger had been cold and calculating, exactly like mine. "Grandfather," I said when he answered, "it's time. I need you to call Father." "Are you certain?" His voice was gravelly with age but sharp with intelligence. "Once we do this, there's no going back. I'm certain Miranda is about to invest everything she has in a fraudulent scheme. When it collapses, she'll try to blame Father, try to access company funds to cover her losses. I need you to be ready to step in." "I'll call him tonight," my grandfather promised. "And Scarlett, your mother would be proud of you. Helen was always stronger than your father gave her credit for. I'm glad you inherited her spine." The next day, my father called a family meeting. We all gathered in his office, me, Miranda, Clarissa, and surprisingly, my grandfather, who I pretended to be shocked to see. "Richard," my father said, his voice strained, "thank you for coming." "James," my grandfather replied coolly, "you said it was urgent." "It is." My father looked older than I remembered, tired and worn down. "I've been doing some investigating into our family finances, and I've discovered some irregularities." Miranda's face went pale. "Irregularities?" "Specifically, I've learned that you've been mortgaging properties and liquidating assets without my knowledge or consent." My father's voice was hard now, angry. "Properties and assets that are in my name, that require my signature." "Can you explain how that happened, Miranda?" I'd been wondering how long it would take my father to notice the forgeries. Miranda had been careful, but not careful enough. She'd forged his signature on the mortgage documents for the penthouse, assuming he wouldn't check the paperwork carefully. She'd underestimated him. James, I can explain," Miranda started, but my grandfather cut her off. "Can you explain why you've been systematically isolating my granddaughter from this company?" he demanded. "Why you've been spreading rumors about her mental health? Why you've been attempting to have her declared incompetent so you can seize control of Helen's shares?" The room went silent. Clarissa was staring at her mother with wide eyes, finally seeing the full extent of Miranda's schemes. My father looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Miranda was stammering now, her composure cracking. "I have documentation," my grandfather continued relentlessly. He pulled out a folder and began spreading papers across my father's desk. Legal documents that were never properly filed, psychiatric evaluations from doctors who never actually examined Scarlett, financial records showing how you've been systematically draining James's accounts, and most interestingly, evidence that you've been planning to leave him entirely once you've secured what you came for. Yes. "That's a lie," Miranda shrieked, but her voice was too high, too desperate. "Is it?" I spoke for the first time, my voice calm. "Then explain this." I pulled out my phone and played a recording. The conversation I'd overheard between Miranda and Clarissa about not needing my father anymore once the investment paid off. I'd been wearing a recording device that day, just in case. The blood drained from Miranda's face. My father's expression went from hurt to stone-cold fury. Clarissa started crying, finally realizing that her mother's greed had destroyed everything. "Get out," my father said quietly. James, please, get out!" His voice was thunderous now. Get out of my house. Get out of my company. Get out of my life. You have 24 hours to remove your belongings. After that, anything left behind will be destroyed. You can't do this, Miranda hissed. I'm your wife. I have rights. You're about to be my ex-wife, my father corrected. And as for rights, you forfeited those when you committed fraud and forgery. I could have you arrested. Consider yourself lucky that I'm only throwing you out. Miranda looked at me then, and I saw pure hatred in her eyes. This was you, she spat. You set me up. The prophecy, the investment, it was all you. I don't know what you're talking about, I said innocently. I'm not responsible for your poor financial decisions, Miranda. You chose to follow your fortune teller's advice. You chose to forge Father's signature. You chose to invest everything in a scheme that was too good to be true. Those were your choices, not mine. You'll regret this, Miranda threatened. I'll destroy you. I'll destroy this entire family. No, my grandfather said quietly, stepping forward. You won't. Because if you try, I'll ensure that every crime you've committed is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft, conspiracy. You'll spend years in prison. So I suggest you take what James is offering, your freedom, and disappear. Miranda stared at us for a long moment, her face twisted with rage and defeat. Then she grabbed Clarissa's arm and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind her. The room was silent for a long moment. Then my father turned to me and I saw tears in his eyes. Scarlett, he whispered, I'm so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. It's okay, Dad, I said. And I meant it. Anger was pointless now. We'd won. You see it now. That's what matters. He pulled me into a hug, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had my father back. But the story wasn't over yet. Miranda still had her $5 million invested in David Wu's scheme, and I needed to ensure that loss was total and irreversible. Over the next month, I watched as David Wu's con continued to play out. Miranda, now living in a modest apartment with Clarissa and desperate to recoup her losses, was clinging to the investment as her last hope. She called David Wu daily, asking about returns, about when she could expect her profits. He strung her along expertly, claiming that the development was ahead of schedule, that her returns would be even bigger than expected. He even showed her fake construction photos and fabricated financial statements. She believed every word because she desperately needed to believe. The prophecy had to come true. It had to, and then, right on. Schedule? Exactly as I remembered from my previous life, David Wu disappeared. His office was cleared out overnight. His phone numbers were disconnected. His website went dark. The Shanghai development turned out to be a real project, but David Wu had never actually been involved with it. He'd been a con artist from the start, and he'd taken millions from dozens of investors before vanishing into thin air. Miranda showed up at our family estate the day after the news broke, looking haggard and desperate. The security guard called my father, who reluctantly agreed to see her. I joined them in his office, wanting to witness her complete downfall. James, please, Miranda begged. I've lost everything. $5 million. The penthouse is foreclosed. I can barely afford rent. I need help. You need help? My father repeated coldly. After everything you did to this family, to my daughter, to my late wife's memory, you have the audacity to ask me for help? I made a mistake, Miranda sobbed. I was following the prophecy. It said I would have great fortune in the East. It said whatever Scarlett wrote in that fake fortune, my father interrupted. Miranda's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. She looked at me, understanding dawning on her face. That's right, I said calmly. I paid the fortune teller to switch your prophecy. I knew you were obsessed with fortune readings, that you made decisions based on them. I knew you'd followed one of her prophecies to set up the con that destroyed my inheritance I stopped myself, nearly revealing too much. I knew you'd follow her advice without question, so I gave you advice that would lead you to ruin. You did this, Miranda whispered. You set me up. The fortune teller, the investor, David Wu. All of it was you. Actually, David Wu is a real con artist, I corrected. I just made sure you found him at the right time. The rest of it, though? Yes, that was me. I spent weeks planning it, ensuring that your greed and superstition would lead you exactly where I wanted you to go. And it worked perfectly. Miranda lunged at me, but my father stepped between us. Get out, Miranda. You'll get no help here. You'll get nothing from this family ever again. You'll pay for this, Miranda screamed at me as security escorted her out. Both of you will pay. I'll sue. I'll go to the police. You'll do nothing. My grandfather's voice cut through her hysteria. He'd appeared in the doorway, his expression icy. Because if you try to cause any more trouble for this family, I'll personally ensure that those forged documents end up in the district attorney's hands. You committed multiple felonies, Miranda. The only reason you're not in prison right now is because my son is too kind-hearted for his own good. So take what's left of your pathetic life and disappear. Because if I see you anywhere near my family again, I'll destroy you so thoroughly that you'll wish you'd never been born. Miranda stared at him, all fight draining out of her. She'd finally met someone as ruthless as she was, and she knew she was beaten. Without another word, she turned and left, and I knew we'd never see her again. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, company restructuring, and personal healing. My father divorced Miranda quickly. She didn't contest it, knowing she had no leverage. Clarissa, to everyone's surprise, reached out to me 6 months later. She'd gotten a job as a junior marketing associate at a small firm, was living in a studio apartment, and was in therapy. I'm sorry, she told me over coffee one afternoon. I was awful to you. I let my mother use me as a weapon against you, and I never questioned it. I was so desperate for her approval that I didn't care who I hurt. I know, I said. I understand what it's like to want a parent's love so badly that you ignore their flaws. She never loved me, Clarissa said quietly. Not really. I was just useful to her. When she lost everything, she blamed me for not being charming enough, pretty enough, smart enough to trap a rich husband for myself. She said I was a disappointment. You're not a disappointment, I told her, and I meant it. You're just a person who was raised by someone who couldn't love anyone but herself. That's not your fault. We didn't become close friends, too much damage had been done, but we reached a kind of peace. Clarissa moved to California eventually, started over completely. Last I heard, she was doing well, working her way up in her career on her own merits. As for me, I threw myself into learning everything I could about Chen Pharmaceuticals. My father, ashamed of how easily he'd been manipulated, stepped back from some of his duties and began training me to eventually take over. My grandfather came back into our lives fully, serving as an advisor and mentor. He taught me everything he'd taught my mother about business, about leadership, about protecting what's yours. I graduated at the top of my business school class 2 years later. By then, I'd already been working at the company for 18 months, learning every department, building relationships with key employees, proving myself capable and worthy. When my father officially named me as his successor, there was no controversy, no surprise. I'd earned it. The company thrived under my influence. I brought in new innovations, expanded our research and development, opened new markets. Within 3 years, our stock price had doubled. Within 5 years, we were one of the top pharmaceutical companies in the country. The board voted to officially rename the company Chen Fitzgerald Pharmaceuticals in honor of my mother and father's partnership, and my mother's legacy was finally properly recognized. I received news about Miranda occasionally through private investigators I'd hired to monitor her. She'd moved to Florida, was living in a rundown apartment, working retail jobs to make ends meet. She'd tried several times to launch new cons, but she'd been blacklisted in investment circles. Word had gotten around about her role in the David Wu scandal. Her reputation was destroyed. The sweetest revenge, though, came 5 years after her downfall. I was having lunch with my grandfather when he handed me a newspaper article with a small smile. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said. The article was about David Wu's arrest in Thailand. He'd been caught running another con and was being extradited back to the United States to face charges for his previous crimes. All his victims, including Miranda, would be part of the prosecution. She would have to testify, relive her humiliation publicly, and she still wouldn't get her money back. The funds had long since been spent or hidden in untraceable offshore accounts. Perfect timing, I murmured. Her lawyer contacted my office last week. She's trying to sue me, claiming I defrauded her. On what grounds? My grandfather asked, amused. She claims I manipulated her into making a bad investment through false pretenses. Her lawyer actually used the phrase undue influence through supernatural manipulation of fortune-telling services. My grandfather laughed, a rare, genuine sound. That's ridiculous. It'll be thrown out. I know, but it'll cost her whatever legal fees she can scrape together, and the publicity will only remind everyone of her own fraud and theft. She's literally spending money she doesn't have to file a lawsuit she can't win. It was thrown out, of course. The judge had barely suppressed his laughter while reading the complaint. Miranda's lawyer withdrew from representing her, citing irreconcilable differences in legal strategy, which I'm pretty sure meant she'd insisted on mentioning the prophecy in court despite his advice. On my 30th birthday, 9 years after my rebirth, I stood in my corner office overlooking Manhattan, president and CEO of Chen Fitzgerald Pharmaceuticals. The company was worth billions now. My father, healthy and happy in his retirement, spent his time traveling and doing charity work in my mother's name. My grandfather, still sharp at 85, came to board meetings and offered advice when asked. I'd married a fellow executive from a partner company 2 years earlier, a kind, intelligent man who respected my drive and matched my ambition. We were expecting our first child, a daughter I planned to name Helen after my mother. My life was everything I'd dreamed of in those dark moments before my death in my first life. I had love, success, security, and justice. The people who'd tried to destroy me had been destroyed themselves, not by my direct hand, but by their own greed and cruelness. I'd simply provided the rope. They'd hanged themselves with it. But the story of Miranda wasn't quite finished. On a cold November evening, my assistant informed me that someone was in the lobby asking to, see me. No appointment, no warning, just a desperate request. Who is it? I asked, though something in my chest already knew. A woman named Miranda Fitzgerald. She says it's urgent. She says she's dying. I should have said no. I should have had security escort her out, but curiosity, and perhaps a small, vindictive desire to see her one final time, made me agree to 5 minutes. She looked nothing like the polished, predatory woman who'd invaded my home 9 years ago. Miranda was thin to the point of emaciation, her hair gray and brittle, her expensive clothes replaced with worn discount store items. She'd aged 20 years in less than a decade. When she walked into my office, she moved like every step caused pain. "Scarlett," she said, her voice hoarse. "Thank you for seeing me." "You have 5 minutes," I replied coldly, not offering her a seat. "What do you want?" "I'm dying," she said simply. "Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, the doctors say I have maybe 3 months." I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, nothing. "I'm sorry to hear that." "No, you're not." She laughed bitterly. "And I don't blame you. I came here to tell you that you won. Completely, totally won. I've spent the last 9 years living in poverty, working minimum wage jobs, watching everything I built crumble to dust. I lost my daughter. Clarissa won't speak to me anymore. I lost my health. I lost everything." "You lost what you tried to steal," I corrected. "Nothing more, nothing less." "I know." Miranda's eyes were dull, defeated. "And I know you won't believe me, but I came here to apologize. Not because I expect forgiveness. Not because I think it will change anything. But because in 3 months, I'll be dead. And I wanted to say it at least once. I'm sorry, Scarlett. I'm sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for trying to destroy you. I'm sorry for dishonoring your mother's memory." I studied her for a long moment, searching for deception, for manipulation, for some hidden angle. But there was nothing there. She was simply a dying woman trying to make peace with her conscience before the end. "Why?" I asked finally. "Why did you do it? You married my father. You could have had a good life without destroying mine." Miranda sank into a chair without asking permission, her strength clearly failing. Because I was greedy. Because I grew up poor and clawed my way up, and it was never enough. I always wanted more. And when I met your father, I saw an opportunity. A wealthy man still grieving his wife with a daughter who had a massive inheritance coming. I thought if I could just push you out of the way, take what was yours, I'd finally have enough. I'd finally be safe. And instead, you lost everything, I said. Instead, I lost everything, she agreed. The prophecy you wrote for me, the fake one. It said great fortune awaited me in the East. But you know what the real prophecy said? The one I was supposed to receive that day? Shook my head. I'd never actually seen the original prophecy, only created my replacement. It said, "Beware the daughter of your enemy, for she carries the wisdom of the dead," Miranda said softly. It warned me that someone I'd wronged would return with knowledge beyond their years and orchestrate my downfall. It said greed would be my destruction. If I'd received that prophecy instead of yours, I might have been more careful. I might have realized that you'd changed somehow, become sharper, more calculating. But I didn't get that warning, and by the time I understood what was happening, it was too late. The irony was almost poetic. The real prophecy had actually been accurate. I had returned from death with wisdom beyond my years, and I had orchestrated her downfall. But her own superstition and greed had led her to the false prophecy instead. "I'm not going to tell you that I forgive you," I said clearly. "You tried to destroy me. You dishonored my mother. You manipulated my father. You got exactly what you deserved." "I know," Miranda whispered. "I just wanted you to know that you were right. Everything you said that day in your father's office, you were right. I was a monster. I used people. I destroyed lives. And karma or fate or whatever you want to call it came for me in the end." She stood up slowly, painfully. "I'll go now. Thank you for listening. And Scarlett, your mother would be proud of you. Helen was everything I pretended to be. Strong, intelligent, honorable. You're just like her." I didn't respond as she walked to the door. But as her hand touched the handle, I heard myself speak. "Miranda." She turned back, hope flickering in her eyes, hope that I might offer something, some word of comfort or forgiveness. "Die alone," I said softly. "Die knowing that you destroyed yourself. Die knowing that every moment of suffering you're experiencing now is the direct result of your own choices. And die knowing that I will never think of you again after you leave this office." The hope in her eyes died, replaced by resignation. She nodded once and left without another word. I never saw her again. 3 months later, my assistant informed me that Miranda Chen Fitzgerald had passed away in a hospice in Tampa, Florida. She'd died alone. Clarissa hadn't gone to see her, and she had no other family or friends left. She was cremated, and her ashes were disposed of in an unmarked plot. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No relief, no satisfaction, no closure. She'd simply ceased to be relevant to my life. The chapter was closed, but her daughter reached out shortly after. Clarissa called my office, and after some hesitation, I agreed to speak with her. "I wanted you to know that she mentioned you at the end," Clarissa said. "In her final days, when the morphine made her honest, she talked about you constantly, about how you were smarter than her, more patient, more ruthless. She said you were the daughter she should have had." "I'm glad I wasn't," I replied. "No child deserves Miranda as a mother." "No," Clarissa agreed. They don't. Listen, Scarlett, I know we're not friends. I know I can never make up for the years I spent making your life miserable. But I wanted to say thank you." "Thank you," I repeated, surprised. "For showing me what my mother really was before I became her." I was 19 when everything fell apart, young enough to change, to become someone different. If you hadn't exposed her, if you hadn't destroyed her plans, I would have spent my whole life following in her footsteps. I would have become just like her. You saved me from that fate, even if it wasn't your intention. I sat back in my chair, processing her words. "What are you doing now, Clarissa?" "I'm a marketing director at a tech startup in San Francisco," she said, and I could hear pride in her voice. I earned it on my own merits. No shortcuts, no manipulations, no stepping on other people. I'm building something real, something I can be proud of. That's good, I said, and I meant it. That's really good. I'm also engaged, Clarissa continued, to a wonderful man who doesn't know anything about my past, about who my mother was. We're getting married next spring. Small ceremony, just close friends. I'm not inviting you. I know that would be too much to ask. But I wanted you to know that your revenge had an unexpected side effect. You freed me too. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about revenge, justice, and consequences. I'd spent 9 years orchestrating Miranda's destruction, and I'd succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. But the satisfaction I'd expected to feel had never materialized. Instead, there was simply peace. The peace of knowing that the threat was gone, that my family was safe, that justice had been served. My intercom buzzed. Mrs. Fitzgerald, your 3 o'clock is here? The board meeting on the new research facility? I'll be right there, I replied, shaking off my reflections. Life moved on. The company continued to grow and thrive. My daughter, Helen, was born healthy and perfect, with my mother's eyes and my father's gentle disposition. My grandfather held her for the first time with tears streaming down his face, calling her his little phoenix, risen from the ashes of tragedy to bring new life to our family. On Helen's first birthday, we held a celebration at the family estate. The house that had once felt cold and hostile now rang with laughter and love. My father was there with his new partner, a kind, genuine woman who worked as a museum curator and had no interest in his money. My grandfather presided over the gathering like a benevolent patriarch. Even Clarissa sent a gift, though she didn't attend, a handmade baby blanket with a note that simply said, "For new beginnings." As I watched my daughter destroy her birthday cake with enthusiastic abandon, my husband's arm around my waist, I realized that this was true victory. Not Miranda's destruction, not the success of my company, not the wealth or power I'd accumulated. This joy, this love, this family was what I'd really been fighting for all along. Miranda had tried to steal my future, and in my first life, she'd succeeded. But in this life, in this second chance, I'd taken it back. Not just taken it back, but built it into something better than I'd ever imagined possible. That night, after the guests had left and Helen was asleep in her nursery, I stood in my mother's old study. My father had preserved it exactly as she'd left it, and I'd made it my own over the years, adding my achievements alongside her memory. Her medical degree hung next to my business school diploma. Her first patent was framed beside my first major company acquisition. I pulled out the old journal I'd been keeping since my rebirth, a detailed chronicle of everything I'd done, every plan I'd executed, every manipulation I'd orchestrated. It was dangerous to keep such a record, but I'd needed it as a reminder of where I'd come from, what I'd survived, what I'd overcome. Now, looking at it, I realized I didn't need it anymore. The past was past. Miranda was dead. The threats were gone. It was time to let go. I took the journal to the fireplace, lit a fire, and watched the pages burn. Years of memories, of pain, of calculated revenge turned to ash and smoke. As the last page curled and blackened, I felt something release in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for 9 years, maybe longer. "Goodbye, Miranda," I whispered to the flames. "Thank you for teaching me how strong I really am." The fire crackled in response, and then there was only silence. 5 years later, on what would have been my mother's 60th birthday, Chen Fitzgerald Pharmaceuticals announced a breakthrough in pancreatic cancer treatment, a new drug that had shown remarkable success in clinical trials, extending survival rates and improving quality of life for patients with the disease that had killed Miranda. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company my mother had built that Miranda had tried to steal had developed a treatment for the very disease that had killed her tormentor. We named the drug Helen's Hope after my mother, and it went on to save thousands of lives. At the press conference announcing the drug's FDA approval, a reporter asked me if the name was significant. My mother, Dr. Helen Chen, founded this company with a simple mission: to heal, to help, to give hope to those who have none, I said, my hand resting on my pregnant belly. Helen would have a little brother soon. This drug embodies that mission. No matter who you are, no matter what you've done, everyone deserves hope. Everyone deserves a chance at life. It was more grace than Miranda had ever shown anyone, including herself. But I'd learned something she never had. True strength isn't about crushing your enemies. It's about rising above them, about building something so beautiful and meaningful that their hatred becomes irrelevant. That evening, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in years. The headstone was elegant and simple: Helen Chen Fitzgerald, beloved wife, mother, and healer. I did it, Mom, I told her, placing fresh flowers on her grave. I protected our family. I built on your legacy. I became the woman you raised me to be. The wind rustled through the trees, and I chose to believe it was her answer. I'd been given a second chance at life, a gift I still didn't fully understand but would never take for granted. I'd use that gift to seek justice, to protect what was mine, to honor my mother's memory, and in doing so, I'd discovered that revenge, while satisfying, was ultimately empty. The real victory was standing here, successful and loved, with a family to protect and a future to build. Miranda had tried to take all of this from me and had lost everything in the attempt. I'd fought back and won, but more importantly, I'd survived. I'd thrived. As I walked back to my car where my husband waited with our daughter, I thought about the prophecy one last time. The fake one I'd written had promised Miranda great fortune in the East, leading her to ruin. The real one had warned her about the daughter of her enemy carrying wisdom of the dead. Both had come true in their own way, but there was a third prophecy, one I'd written for myself in those dark early days after my rebirth. The phoenix rises from ashes, stronger and more beautiful than before. Those who tried to destroy her will burn in the flames of their own making. I'd risen, they'd burned, and now, finally, I was free. Helen looked up at me from her car seat as I slid into the passenger seat. "Mama happy?" she asked in her simple toddler vocabulary. "Yes, baby," I told her, kissing her forehead. "Mama is very happy." And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, it was completely true. As we drove away from the cemetery, I didn't look back. There was no need. The past was buried, literally and figuratively. Ahead of me lay a future I'd fought for, earned, and deserved. A future that Miranda Chen Fitzgerald, for all her scheming and manipulation, could never have imagined or achieved. She'd sought fortune through prophecy and deception. I'd found it through resilience and truth. In the end, that made all the difference. The fake prophecy had led Miranda to her ruin, exactly as I'd planned. But the real prophecy, the one about karma, consequence, and justice, had led me to my triumph. And that was a story worth living, worth fighting for, worth savoring every single day. Months turned into years. My son, James Chen Fitzgerald, named after both my father and my mother's maiden name, grew strong and curious. Helen started school, showing early aptitude for science, just like her grandmother. The company continued its upward trajectory, developing new treatments, saving lives, employing thousands. On the 10th anniversary of Miranda's death, though I only realized the date in retrospect as I'd long since stopped tracking her existence, I received an unexpected package. It came from a law office in Florida, forwarded through several channels before reaching my desk. Inside was a letter in Miranda's handwriting, along with a single photograph. The letter was dated 2 weeks before her death, written in a shaky scrawl that spoke of pain and medication. "Scarlett," it read, "if you're reading this, I'm dead, and my lawyer has executed my final wishes. I'm sending you this photograph because I want you to understand something about the woman you defeated." This picture was taken when I was 7 years old. That's me in the tattered dress, standing outside a trailer park in rural Louisiana. My mother was a prostitute. My father was whoever paid that week. I grew up hungry, cold, and afraid. I swore that I'd never be poor again, that I'd do whatever it took to climb out of that hell. But in escaping poverty, I became something worse than poor. I became cruel. I became everything I'd hated about the people who'd looked down on me as a child. I became my own worst nightmare. You had every right to destroy me. I earned that destruction with every choice I made. But I want you to know that the woman you defeated wasn't just a monster. She was a scared little girl who took the wrong path and went so far down it that she couldn't find her way back. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But maybe when your daughter is grown and faces her own challenges, you can use my story as a cautionary tale. Teach her that survival without honor is just another form of death. Teach her that the price of cruelty is always higher than the cost of kindness. You won because you were better than me. Not smarter, though you were, but better. You had something I never did, the ability to love without condition, to protect without destroying, to win without losing yourself in the process. I hope your life is everything mine wasn't. I hope you find peace, joy, and purpose. And I hope you never become the person I was. Miranda Chen Fitzgerald. The prophecy was real, both of them. The fortune teller truly did have a gift. She'd warned me about you months before you switched the prophecies. She told me that my greatest enemy would be someone I'd wronged, someone who would return with the wisdom of death to orchestrate my downfall. I didn't listen. I thought I could outsmart fate. I was wrong. Fate sent me you, and you were exactly the reckoning I deserved. I stared at the photograph for a long time. The little girl in the picture did look scared, with hollow eyes and bruised arms. It was impossible not to feel a flicker of pity for that child, even knowing what she would become. But pity for the child didn't excuse the actions of the adult. Miranda had made her choices. She'd had opportunities to be different, to be better, and she'd rejected them all in favor of greed and cruelty. Her tragic past didn't give her the right to create tragic futures for others. I filed the letter away in a locked drawer and never looked at it again. But I did think about her words sometimes, especially as my children grew. I taught them about integrity, about fighting fair, about protecting what matters without destroying yourself in the process. I taught them their grandmother Helen's values: compassion, innovation, service. And yes, I taught them about consequences. I told them stories, carefully edited versions, about people who chose greed over goodness, who hurt others for personal gain, and how those choices always caught up with them in the end. I never mentioned Miranda by name, but her story became a parable in our family. The cautionary tale of a woman who had everything and lost it all because she tried to steal even more. Helen, my daughter, grew up to be a doctor like her grandmother. James became a lawyer, specializing in corporate ethics and fraud prevention. Both of them were kind, brilliant, and strong, everything I'd hoped they would be. On my 50th birthday, my father, now in his 80s but still sharp, took me aside at the celebration. He said quietly, I've spent 20 years thinking about what happened with Miranda, about how I failed to see what she was doing, how I failed to protect you. Dad, we've talked about this. Let me finish, he interrupted gently. I failed you, but you didn't fail yourself. You fought back with intelligence and patience. You didn't let anger make you cruel. You didn't let revenge consume you. You took back what was yours and then moved on to build something beautiful. That takes a strength I'm not sure I have. You gave me that strength, I told him. You and Mom. Even when Miranda had poisoned you against me, some part of you always loved me. That love is what kept me human. That love is what stopped me from becoming like her. He hugged me then, and we stood there for a long moment, father and daughter, survivors of a war fought in living rooms and boardrooms instead of battlefields. Your mother would be so proud, he whispered. I know, I replied. I feel her with me sometimes, especially when I'm making hard decisions. I ask myself what she would do, and somehow I always know the answer. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, surrounded by the quiet peace of a life well lived, I thought about prophecies and fate, about revenge and redemption. Miranda had believed in prophecies so strongly that she'd let them control her life. She'd followed that fake fortune reading to her doom because she'd wanted to believe in destiny, in shortcuts, in easy paths to wealth and power. But I'd learned something different. Fate isn't written in stars or cards or prophecies. It's written in choices. Every decision we make, every action we take, every kindness or cruelty we show, those are the real prophecies, writing our futures with every moment. Miranda's prophecy was self-fulfilling. She believed she deserved fortune and took it by any means necessary, which led directly to her ruin. My prophecy was simpler. Work hard, protect what matters, honor those who came before, and build something worthy. Both of us had our prophecies come true. The difference was that mine was based on character, not superstition. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about that fortune teller one last time. I'd paid her to switch the prophecies, but she'd done something more than that. She'd given me information about Miranda's beliefs, her weaknesses, her patterns. The fortune teller had told me that Miranda visited her every month, asking the same questions. When will I be secure? When will I have enough? She'll never have enough, the fortune teller had told me. Women like her, they carry an emptiness that no amount of money can fill. The prophecy you're asking me to give her, it will destroy her, not because it's false, but because it's exactly what she wants to hear. She'll follow it without question because it confirms what she already believes, that she deserves more. The fortune teller had been right. Miranda's downfall had been inevitable from the moment her greed exceeded her caution. I'd simply accelerated the timeline and ensured that when she fell completely. Some might say I was cruel, that I should have shown mercy, taken the high road, let karma handle things naturally. But those people had never lost everything, had never been systematically destroyed by someone who was supposed to love them, had never died with the bitter taste of injustice in their mouth. I'd been given a second chance, a miracle I still couldn't explain. And I'd used it not just for revenge, but for justice, for restoration, for protection. Miranda's destruction was a side effect of my own survival, necessary collateral damage in the war to reclaim my life. And I'd won that war completely, not just survived it, won it. Built something better than what I'd lost, became someone stronger than who I'd been. The fake prophecy had led Miranda to ruin, but my own prophecy, the one I'd written in my heart on the day I woke up in my 21-year-old body with a lifetime of bitter wisdom, had led me to triumph. I will take back everything they stole. I will protect everyone they threatened. I will become everything they tried to prevent me from being. And when I'm done, they will be nothing but a cautionary tale, while I will be a legacy. Every word had come true, and that was the greatest fortune of all, the end.